This ends now.
Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is the latest film in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, and it stars our titular character as well as his companions Tails and Knuckles. The three of them together make up Team Sonic, and then you also have Sonic's best human friends, Tom and Maddie. Like the previous movies, they're there, but they're mostly sidelined throughout this movie. As far as antagonists go, Jim Carrey is back once again to play Dr. Robotnik, but this time in a dual role because he's also playing Dr. Robotnik's grandfather, also Dr. Robotnik. And then you have Keanu Reeves with the voice of Shadow as the third antagonist for this movie. Now, right out of the gate, one of the things I really liked about this movie was the humor. I do have some issues with that I'll get to more in a moment, but there was a lot of jokes throughout this movie, and I did find myself laughing throughout it. Some of the stuff I also really liked about this movie was the performances. I thought pretty much everyone in the cast did good job for what they were trying to do. Some better than others. One of my favorites, though, was Idris Elba playing Knuckles. He was my favorite character in the previous movie, and he was my favorite character in this movie because I like having someone like that who is more serious and takes things literally. I think it's probably difficult for a writer and actor to perform a character like that because I think it's too easy to go into the category of like when they're trying that, they come across as annoying, but I think there was a good balance struck with this one, and Idris Elba, like the previous one, just knocked it out of the park with the role.
Are you Detective Pikachu?
He does look like a Pokemon. Pika Pika.
Obviously, Ben Schwartz does a good job voicing Sonic. If you liked his performance in the previous two movies, then it's more of the same with this one. James Marsden is back as Sonic's best human friend, Tom, and he doesn't really do a whole lot in this movie. He doesn't really even have a whole lot of screen time, which to me, that's okay when it comes to this movie because I did find that he did have his purpose in the first movie. In the second movie, it felt like the script was trying to find something for him to do in order to involve him. And I thought a lot of the stuff involving him and his wife, Maddie, in the second movie were kind of a weak point for it. So in this one, they just kind of sidelined them for most of the movie, brought them in when they needed them, and then just pushed them off to the side again. And I think that's okay for this type of movie because you don't really need to focus on the human characters. Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails are the primary focus as well as the antagonists of the movie, both the Robotnik doctors as well as Shadow. So I like that the script was trying to keep everything focused on what really people are coming there to see. For Jim Carrey, I thought there was something weird about his performance in this one because he's playing Robotnik, the same one that he played in the previous two movies, as well as his grandfather in this one too. And since most of the scenes they have together, or most of the scene he has, is basically just him acting against himself. And I did hear some talk about Jim Carrey taking the role for this one when he's supposed to be retired from acting because he wanted the paycheck. And part of the negotiations, or at least this is what I'm thinking that went into this, also allowed him to basically crank up the Jim Carreyisms to 11. Yeah, he kind of had those in the previous two movies, and that was fine then. But it really does seem like they elevated it in this movie because he's acting against himself. And a lot of the scenes where they had that, I think the humor just didn't work for me and they kind of dragged it on a little bit too longer. And I found myself thinking like, okay, this was funny at first, but they keep beating this dead horse and I wish they would just continue on with the story. So if they would have just chopped down some of those scenes with Jim Carrey playing against just himself, I think it would have been fine. Another antagonist of this one is obviously Shadow. That's the big name drop in the trailer that's really bringing things new because in every Sonic movie, you have to have another Sonic character as another antagonist that they bring into it. And I thought Keanu Reeves did a fine job in the role on that one too. He doesn't really have a huge vocal performance range, but I think it worked out pretty well with what they were trying to do with Shadow.
Why do you look like me?
I don't look like you. You look like me. Why do you look like me?
In each one of these subsequent Sonic movies, there's always a new character that they're bringing into this world, and I would like to see more Shadow in future Sonic the Hedgehog movies. I don't know if there's any plans to bring him back in the Sonic the Hedgehog 4, or if Keanu Reeves would be willing to come back to voice the character, but I would like to see more of him in future Sonic movies because I do think he has his place within this group or has his place within this universe. Maybe not necessarily as a primary focus, but I think there is still more that they can do with the character here. I also really like how they establish the origin story to Shadow. They don't spend too much time on it and they give you just enough to kind of understand the character and what his motivations are. In fact, he's pretty much the driving force behind this movie because everything that happens in this movie is basically a result of him and what happened to him in the past. And it is kind of tragic, his backstory, and I do feel sorry for him throughout the character. And to me, that's a great way to actually establish a villain for a movie, because it's something that you can kind of understand them, even if you don't necessarily agree with what their actions are throughout the movie. It makes sense, at least from their perspective. And I think they were trying to create this parallel between Shadow and Sonic, and how their backstories are establishing why each character is the way that we know them now. The problem with that, though, is it felt like their personalities were already kind of set in stone before we even met them. Like, take Sonic for the first movie. At the start of the movie, before he even meets Tom, he already has kind of a fun, carefree personality to him. And then when we get to the start of Shadow's origin story in this movie, he's kind of how we already see him throughout the movie. The only difference is you just understand his motivation and why he's working with both the Robotniks to accomplish their goal in this movie. As far as the effects go, I think they did a pretty decent job with this one. It'd obviously be very difficult to have to focus a movie around CGI characters, especially working within the real world, but I think it pulled it off pretty well, because you're not really thinking that these look too cartoony. Obviously, they are cartoony, but it seemed to work fine, and you just kind of forget about it as the movie goes along, and you just see them as actual characters. They also did a pretty good job with the effects for Jim Carrey in this movie, since he was playing both roles and he was interacting with himself throughout the movie. So being able to accomplish that, I will give them credit for that too. And the only problem, though, is I do wish that it was different with how he played each character, because he obviously plays Robotnik in a certain way. He's played that for the last two movies. But I think for the older Robotnik, it would have been more interesting if he went about that character in a different way. But instead, it was basically each character was exactly the same. The only difference is their motives throughout the movie and the amount of makeup that Jim Carrey had to go through for that particular day. But to me, that's kind of the smallest thing about it, because I already told you about why I didn't like Jim Carrey's performance in this movie. And I think this is just kind of an extension of that. But overall, I really did enjoy this movie, or at least I thought it was a fun time. I didn't have any regrets about watching it. I don't think it's probably the best Sonic movie. I haven't seen the other two in a little while, but I think I like the second movie a little bit better than this one, but still I found this one enjoyable too. And that's why I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. But let me know what you think about this movie in the comment section below. Have you seen this one? What did you think about it? And also, what's your favorite Sonic movie out of the 3 movies that came out? Because like I said, I think 2 is the best one, but that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to see more of my movie reviews or stay up to date with the latest entertainment news out there. And if you can, click that like button and share this video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.